Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So in case you missed the first one, what we're working on is a end grain chessboard. So we've got the board all glued up here, all our end grain is in the right orientation now. Now all we have to go through and do is clean up all the glue squeeze out in here, go through the drum sander a few times, and get this part flattened. From there, we'll be able to go back in and add in our frame. That's going to go around this because it's going to be a decorative frame. And then that will be it. So we've only got a little bit of work to do to this thing before it's all done. And I'm just getting really excited to see how it's going to look. Because once we get through this drum sanding portion and get this all polished up to nice 220 grit surface finish, it's going to start looking really good. Okay, so I've got our blank all squared up now, or as square as I can get it. My miter gauge setup is not super good, so it took me a few tries, which was not great. So it means that some of our squares are no longer the nice, perfect 1 3/4 size that I initially planned them to be. The worst of them is about a 1/16 undersize. So it's nothing that is super obvious. Unless you're looking very closely, it's very hard to tell which of the squares are slightly undersized. And so this all could have been avoided pretty easily from the get-go if I just done what I initially had planned to do. If I left all of these outer perimeter of pieces just slightly larger, that would have left me some room to actually go back in and square this whole thing up. And that would have been the way to solve the issue that I have now. If you're trying to make a chessboard with nice even sized squares, just make sure you leave your outer perimeter slightly larger so that you can actually sneak up on the cut. But anyway, now we're gonna move on to making the frame for this. So trying to work on this frame, I've run into a slight snag. So the one thing I didn't think about when it came to this frame is what pieces I actually need to make it work out. Because there's two ways you can make a really nice looking frame. You can either use book match pieces, so you take a thick piece of wood, split it in half, and that way you get a consistent grain wrap all the way around your frame. That's one really good way to do it. The other way is to use quarter or rift sawn wood. So you just have really straight grain running around the outside edges. That then lines up a lot better on your mitered corners. So the problem that I'm having here is that the piece that I was planning to use for the frame, I used to make the board itself. Because it was the only chunk of wood that I had that was large enough to get all the pieces I needed out of here. So that opens up another problem. So one option here would be to go with white oak, because I have that big chunk of white oak. But just with how this board looks, I think it would look a lot better with a walnut border on it. But because I don't have any pieces of wood in the shop that are actually going to work out for the frame here, and I really don't want to have to go buy wood, especially because it's a weekend, so I'd have to leave this project until Monday to go buy more wood. I think what I might do instead is change up my original design or my original plan for this chessboard, and rather than having a mitered frame, I might go for a bridal joint frame. So we're going to have some nice through joinery in that showing on the sides. So it will be a little bit different, and I think it's going to be a little bit more interesting than just having the mitered corners. Plus, the benefit of using the bridal joints for these corners is that it may actually be easier overall, because I know that my board is not like perfectly square on all four sides. It might actually make it easier to work with, because when you're dealing with miters, everything has to line up absolutely perfectly. Whereas when you're dealing with bridal joints, you can kind of skew the angle of your shoulders using some hand tools and that to make sure that things line up. Plus, I think it's going to be a little bit more of an interesting design style. Okay, so now we're in one of those technical debates about what is going to be the better thing to do here. Because going through and actually milling up all of our pieces for the frame, they all came out pretty much fully rift sawn. They're beautiful pieces of walnut. I'm actually really surprised that they all came out with as straight a grain as they have. So we very well could do a mitered frame and it would look pretty dang good. But I also really like the idea of doing the bridal joints. So I'm kind of stuck at the moment. But the trick is that I can't take an accurate enough measurement on either of our sides because I know they're both just a hair under 14, but they are slightly different. So they're not going to be the exact same there. And so the trick is now is if I do my bridal joints, I need something to reference against. Because what I need to know before I can cut my joinery is how long each of these side pieces needs to be. Now, we can have some overhang, that's fine afterwards, because that's, we want to have that anyway. So we have something we can trim off and to clean up the joint. But we also need to know how far to cut in our shoulders for our tenons and all that on the bridal joint so we know how to line everything up. And that is where the real trick is going to come in. So my thinking is here, I'm going to take all 4 of my frame pieces and just cut them to one similar size because I know all 4 are going to be very, very close in size when we're all said and done. And I want to make sure I have that overhang outside of the joint that I can then clean up once we're all completed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them down to one random size. So it's not going to be anything in reference to the actual board here. Then because the tenoning jig works in that vertical fashion, I can slowly raise the blade and constantly be checking my pieces here. And I can take material away from both sides equally and very slowly and controlled. Then I can sneak those shoulders back until they perfectly line up with our board. So I already know exactly which frame pieces are going to which areas. I already went through and labeled those. So I know where they're going to go. So that I think is going to be the best course of action. Okay, so that was working absolutely wonderfully. We've got our first 8 cuts made, so we have our our middle area defined out there nicely. The only issue is that the handle for that jig just cracked on me. So the set screw that's meant to actually lock it in place no longer sits nicely in the threads because this thing is just some cheap metal. I don't even know what it is. And so the handle is cracked right along the threads there so that the set screw doesn't actually bite into the little notch that it's supposed to bite into on there. So I'm not willing to use that jig anymore because I cannot lock these pieces on safely. So luckily on both these pieces, I've got the middle area here established. So all I'm going to go in and do is finish this off with some hand tools. Okay, so we have our frame mostly together here, and I'm gonna leave it here for tonight because I wanna stop and think about the order of operations before I just continue on with it. Plus, it's getting pretty late in the day, and I'm pretty much out of time in the shop anyway. So the frame right now is looking awesome. I've got it almost perfectly fitted up. We've got this one last corner that, again, like I said, I'm gonna work on tomorrow, because all I need to do is just adjust the width of this board by a little, just a small amount, and I'm getting really dang close. As you guys saw, I was using the hand plane on the edge of this, as well as a sanding block to just slowly remove material. And the gap is just getting smaller and smaller, but I've probably got another, 30, 40 minutes of working on this gap to try and get rid of it. But I am absolutely sure that just by removing a little bits of material that I can get rid of that gap. So I'm gonna work on that tomorrow. What I wanna stop and think about is what else I wanna do to this board. Because the one thing that I know that I won't be able to do this once it's all glued up is sand and fix any gaps or anything that comes into it. So I want to make it so that I can actually hide any potential issues that are going to come in during the glue up. And the first thing that I'm noticing is that our end pieces here, so our ones that have the tenon on them, right now are just sitting slightly above the outer two. And so what I'm assuming is happening here is as we're pushing the tenons together, the outer parts of the bridal joint, I really don't know joint terminology or anything like that, but the outer sides of the bridal joint are getting pushed outwards. So I think that that's always going to happen no matter what I do with this joint. So I'm thinking that what I might do here is add in my favorite step design. So what we'll do is we'll just remove a little bit of material from the top side of these two outer ones. And then we'll add a nice little bevel right along the inside edge of these inner two pieces, the pieces that have the tenons on them. And then that will create a nice step design to our frame, adding a little bit more visual detail and just making it a little bit cooler overall. So I think I'm gonna add that in tomorrow. On the bottom side, it's the exact same story, which is why I know it's the outer part of the joint just splitting a little bit. So on the bottom side, I made sure when I was cutting the tongues into these frame pieces, that the frame pieces sit just below the actual chessboard here. So what we'll be able to do is if I really want it perfectly flat down here, I can pass this through the drum sander referencing the top side of the chessboard, and then that will flatten all these pieces in line with the bottom of the chessboard here, or I can just leave them slightly proud like they are right now, because that means that when the chessboard is sitting there, it'll be the frame that's fully supporting it, and it's a much better chance that it will sit flat on the tabletop. The last thing I have to consider is what I want to do with the actual joinery. So like I said before, I left these pieces extra long so that when we finish doing the glue up, I can cut off that protruding joinery. But now having it all sitting here, I think that having that proud joinery actually looks really cool. So I got to think about this one overnight because I don't quite know how to go about doing a glue up with proud joinery like this, because we're definitely going to get glue squeeze out, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not quite sure how to go about cleaning up all these inner areas and that with the space that I have here. I'm gonna think about it, and if I can figure out how to do it, then I might just leave the joinery proud. If I can't figure out how to do it, then we'll just cut it flush after the glue up. So overall, this chessboard is coming together really cool. I'm loving how it's looking right now. We're definitely not gonna be done it by Monday like I was expecting, but I'm really loving how it's coming together. I think it looks really cool, and I'm excited to actually keep moving on with this project eventually, making the chess pieces, all that kind of stuff. But anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. So as always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.